Hey, good evening, guys. What's going on at the Guitar Historian here with you today? Really bad day in rock and roll history. Charlie Watts has passed away, and I mean, what can you say? You know, everybody jokes around about the Stones, being unkillable, and all of them still being alive, pretty much, except for Brian. And it is pretty crazy that they've all survived so much over all these years. And Charlie died at 80. I wouldn't say that was cheated. He definitely got a full life, and the man did more in probably a year than we all do in an entire lifetime. So, I try not to mourn too much when people pass away at an older age because, they went out on their terms. They lived their life the way they wanted to live it. And, the guy is a legend, and he's going to go on as a legend in rock and roll history forever. He's going to be remembered forever as one of, in most people's eyes, one of the top two or three rock and roll bands that ever existed. So, pretty good life for Mr. Watts, for sure. And I definitely want to, kind of keep it more celebratory in nature and just remember, how much the man did in his life. I was reading up on Charlie today, and there were a lot of things I didn't know about him because, obviously when somebody passes away, you just think, well, he was a drummer. But, there was a lot of history in his life. He was the son of a truck driver, or in England, you might call them a lorry driver. And he was born in the London area, but I believe was brought up in the Wembley area of London. And very, very working class, very blue collar, lived in a prefab, which is basically temporary houses that they built after World War II, after the Nazis bombed them into the Stone Age and destroyed, 500,000 houses in England. They basically had to put up all these temporary houses. So, his upbringing was not by any stretch of the imagination glamorous. And he actually trained when he was in school to be a graphic designer. And believe it or not, he actually used that a lot of times in the Stones. He used to design the inner sleeves, I believe, and some album kind of cover situations. I don't think he did anything on the album covers, but like the sleeves, the pullouts, and he did a lot regarding the live shows. He would actually help design the stages that the Stones would perform on. So that was really cool. The fact that he was actually able to use his background in graphic design and, continue to also do the drumming thing. But obviously everybody wonders, how he got into the Stones. And it was a pretty straightforward story. He was a jazz drummer at a time when rock and roll was really starting to explode in England. And alongside people like Ginger Baker, who was another jazz drummer, these were guys that saw the writing on the wall. They looked around and they were like, well, there's money to be made here in rock. So I believe he started playing with Alexis Corner's Blues Incorporated, and that's where he met Brian Jones, Ian Stewart, Bill Wyman to some extent. He basically started there, and then when Mick and Keith came into the picture and Brian and everybody started to make the Rolling Stones, he kind of was drafted into that. And not at first, because the original version of the Stones was actually not with Charlie Watts. And the funny story is that they couldn't afford him. Okay? Because he made decent money doing his thing. He played a lot of different styles at that time. He would still play the jazz, but he also played in Alexis Corner, and he made good money doing his gigs. And at first, the Stones couldn't really afford him. And I think there was actually kind of a leap of faith eventually where he had to just see, hey, this is going to be a good band. Maybe I should, give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think it ended up working out for him, And, obviously you look at Charlie Watts' style, and you're not going to listen to a Stones song and very often notice what the drummer's doing, right? And that's exactly the way he wanted it. It's very much like when you listen to the Beatles, you don't really notice what Ringo's doing. Maybe you have very, very few songs. But And Charlie had his moments. You know, he had songs where, you know, like "Get Off My Cloud" and "Gimme Shelter" really stands out to me as really good songs. But the man was just rock solid, timekeeper. Just really, really was a guy who just lived time, you know, and he was the backbone of that band. He absolutely was. And they knew they needed him at that time. They knew that they needed him, of all people, to come and, you know, basically complete the Rolling Stones. And, you know, obviously the rest is history. They went on to, you know, obvious superstardom and everything. I believe the only surprises that I noticed were like in the 80s, he talked about the time where, you know, drugs and alcohol kind of got a little too involved in his life. He called it his midlife crisis. And when you think about it, like we say to like, God, midlife crisis. I mean, what are you talking about? It was the middle of his life. It was exactly the middle of his life. Think about how long of a career this man has had. That 1983 was the middle of his life, and that he was 43, 40, and that was when, yeah, I mean that was, it's just insane because you think of them now, it's like they're ubiquitous, they're around, they're just constantly there, you know, and you don't even think about, you know, them being in their 40s or 50s or anything like that. It's just they're just the Stones, man, you know. But obviously the best story about Charlie Watts, if you've never heard it, I'm sure most of you have, is the story about when Mick called him in the middle of the night in the hotel. And the thing about Charlie was he was not about all the girls. Okay, he was absolutely faithful to his wife through and through. His entire life he was faithful to his wife. Okay, so he was never with the, quote, birds as the other ones were. And he would just go back to his hotel room, and he kind of like stayed above all the stuff that everybody else was doing. He got involved a little bit, but not quite to the extent as somebody like a Keith and obviously Mick, and that sometimes Mick Taylor was getting involved in. But Mick Jagger called him in the middle of the night, drunk off his butthole, and basically said, you know, "Where's my drummer?" So the story goes that Charlie got out of bed, shaved, got himself together, you know, cleaned himself up, put on a full suit, tie, everything, walked down to the lobby where the rest of the band was, walked right up to Mick and just smacked him in the face and said, "I am not your effing drummer. You're my effing singer." Okay? And that's a true story. Actually, Charlie kind of said it was true later on, and because he apologized to Mick for it, said he was drunk at the time and didn't really mean it and everything. Like, dude, Mick was the one that was out of line, okay? Let's just remember that. He deserved it. He had it coming to him, all right? He needed to be knocked down a few pegs, for sure. But you know, that'll tell you everything you need to know, okay? Charlie was a just stand-up guy through and through, just a guy who, in every sense of the word, was just rock solid. That's the word I would use for him, just rock solid. The man was just always 100% solid. And just as a little treat, and this really doesn't have anything to do with anything, but because we're talking about the Stones, and because I've never really showed you guys, I have something to show you. Let me grab it real quick. Okay, this is a Who book. You're like, why has he got a Who book? Well, there's something in this Who book that I need to show you guys. Okay. And I'm going to take a picture of this. So if you, and I'm going to show it up on the screen really slow so you guys can see it. But this is one of my prized rock and roll collection, or possessions, I should say. This is a real Rolling Stones set list from the 40 Licks World Tour in 2002-2003. Okay? Now, I'm going to try to go from the top to the bottom as I scroll with the picture you're looking at on the screen right now. But this show was from September 22nd, 2002. So when they came to Philadelphia on that tour, they actually played 3 different shows. They played the first show in a stadium. That's all I know. Then they played the second one in an arena, which is smaller, but still big. And then they played the third show at the Tower Theater, which is, if you don't know Philadelphia, it's a very small theater. It's also famous for having the David Bowie live album, David Live, recorded there. So it's a very famous theater here in Philadelphia, still around, obviously. And if you look at this set list, you can see that basically it has the keys, it has the tempo, and it has all the songs that were, played and everything. And if you look really carefully at the tempo part, right, you'll see some of the songs actually have KR in them. And that means Keith Richards, meaning however Keith started the song on his guitar is how the tempo was going to be. Okay? But if you look at this set list, it's unbelievable. They got songs that they would never play elsewhere. Sad, 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 Hand of Fate, No Expectations. They got Hot Stuff on here. Heart of Stone, Going to a Go-Go, Love Train, Rocks Off, Stray Cat Blues. They have the end of the show is obviously they kind of close it out with all the big numbers, but it's just insane. And this obviously being like, I'm probably going to frame it. What the story behind it is, my dad was a mailman, and he had a lot of friends that were obviously working with him. And mailmen, they work during the day, so some of them have second jobs. And one of his mailman friends actually had a second job doing security, and happened to be doing security at the Tower Theater that night. And so when the show was over, he kind of crept in and just took one of the set lists that was laying around on the stage. Who knows who used it? It could have been Keith. It could have been Mick. It could have been Charlie. It could have been anyone, So it's one of my prized possessions. I just wanted to show it to you guys because it kind of links me with the Stones directly, and it's one of my favorite things to look at every so often. So I just hope you guys enjoyed that. But getting back to Charlie, at the end of the day, when you talk about the greatest drummers in rock, obviously there's a lot of more flamboyant, louder, more, I guess, faster, guys that you can look at. You can look at all these guys. But at the end of the day, when you just boil it all down to the most pure essence of what rock and roll is and what the Rolling Stones needed at that time, it was the same thing as like Ringo with the Beatles. They needed that rock solid tempo behind them to hold it all together, that glue that just held the beat together. Let them be melodic, let them do whatever they wanted to do, and then they just had a drummer behind them that was just able to do that. So the best thing that I could say about Charlie in the scheme of things is, he's the most pure rock and roll drummer I've ever seen. He's just pure, steady, rock solid beat and does whatever the song needs and is always there and always sits right in the pocket. What else can you say? What else can you ask for, really? There's certain guys, you look at a guy like Ginger. Well, Ginger's different. I put Ginger on a pedestal the same way I do Charlie Watts. But you look at guys like John Bonham, you look at Keith Moon, if you take those guys out of the bands they were in and put them in different bands, could they work in those bands? And you take a guy like Charlie Watts, you can put him in any band, anywhere. You can even put him in Led Zeppelin. You could put him in these heavy-ass bands from the period, right? He would work in those bands because he's so rock solid. And that's all you can say. So, it's really tough loss. Obviously, we knew this day was coming. Obviously, that, the Stones are all getting up there at this point. Paul and Ringo are getting up there. And you think these guys are going to last forever. You think that it's just going to be, the never-ending story, and we're always going to have them around. And then when they're gone, you feel this void. And luckily, I was able to see them. That's where I got this shirt when they were on the 50 and Counting tour some years back. And thankfully, I was able to see the Stones as they are. Because now if I want to go see the Stones, they're not going to be the complete Stones. I feel like, Mick, Keith, Charlie are the Stones. They will always be the Stones. And I feel like they kind of need to call it, the Rolling Stones minus Charlie Watts or something. Because that's how important it is. So we mourn, but we also celebrate the life of an absolute rock and roll icon, the rock solid Charlie Watts. Rest in peace, sir. Your life will be remembered forever. So that's really the best I could say for you, man. And wherever you are, hopefully you're meeting up with Ian and Brian up there and getting to catch up on all the stuff they missed. And just keep on rocking up there, man. Just keep on rocking. But thanks for watching, and let me know your thoughts about Charlie below. Let's just, like I said, celebrate a great life. See you next time.